Hi, I'm Jed Matthew Sadler.
I'm WIM Natasha Regan. Today we're looking at an AlphaZero Stockfish game from 2018, and it's in the French defense in the Steinitz variation. AlphaZero is white, Stockfish is black, and AlphaZero plays what is the best move out of the opening when it plays Queen e3, which is a move of Ponomariov's. And Stockfish then trades off into an endgame. So the queens come off very early in this game, and it's considered to be a very slight advantage for white in this endgame. AlphaZero plays actively and marches its kingside pawns forward, and Stockfish plays not the most active defense. And so instead of moves that Leela would play in their position, so kind of a5, b5, and queenside pawns, then Stockfish just plays more quietly. AlphaZero gets a space advantage on the king side and manages to get its pawn to g6, restricting black's king. And then, very thematically, switches attention completely over to the other side of the board and plays on the queen side. AlphaZero even feels able to give up the g6 pawn when it manages to restrict the king in another way with its rook on a7. So a very nice endgame, and AlphaZero manages to convert the win.
Yeah, very interesting game this, and one thing that struck me about it was that if you're looking at recent games, often between AlphaZero and Stockfish, then you're seeing, still Leela managing to win some quite similar games, especially in the French defence. So just goes to show how how tricky these positions are to play, and how difficult it is to actually teach an engine how to actually play them, and somehow the neural nets seem to do it better intuitively. And that's also, as Natasha pointed out, you'll also see that in how Leela defended in my engine games, which was I think much more impressive than what Stockfish managed. So let's have a look at how this turned out. It's quite an interesting line, big line of the French Steinitz. I've played it quite a lot myself. So e4, e6, d4, d5. I think e4, e6 were the only two moves specified, and then the engines were on their own. E5, knight fd7, f4, c5, and knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3. There are many possibilities in this line, and we did a video recently on Stockfish playing the French Steinitz as black in the TCC bonus games. Played against Ali Stein, Stockfish, and Leela. Managed to draw against Ali and Stockfish, but lost to Leela. Again, in this type of ending. So well worth checking out that video if you're interested. Here, Stockfish played the old main line, which I've played quite a bit as well. Knight takes d4, bishop c5, queen d2, castles, and now knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and a6. What's Black's idea? Black's idea simply is to play b5 and then probably b4, a5, try and play bishop a6 and get some counterplay on that with that half-open c-file, the a and b pawns rushing down, swap off the light-squared bishop, which is Black's most dodgy piece. When it works really nicely, actually.
It's the dodgy in the video.
So it does work. It does work really nicely, but it's White does have some good, accurate ways to play. Now against London Classic, I think 2013, Peter Schvidler played Queen f2 against me, and I had a nice idea against that. I played b6, bishop d3, and f6, and somehow with all those pins happening, the pin of the bishop on c5 against the bishop on d4, and also rook f8 against the queen on h2. It was quite difficult for White to hold the centre, and I held a draw quite easily. Not too many problems, but there is a stronger move for White in this position, and as Natasha said, it's I think this was Ponomariov's move, and that's Queen e3. Similar ideas, just keeping the bishop on d4 solid for now, but you're not opposing the queen opposite the rook, so f6 is going to be a lot less dangerous. And white's idea is to play bishop d3 and then queen h3, and attack the pawn on h7, threatening mate. So Stockfish takes a very sensible decision. After bishop d3, white's aiming to play queen h3 next move. Black takes on d4, takes, and goes queen c5, forcing the exchange of queens. Knight e2, and black plays b5, and takes, and knight d4. And this is a pretty typical French Steinitz endgame. Yeah, I mean, what's the evaluation? Probably just the evaluation is just a little bit better for white. Quite confusing, I think, when you look at games in this line, because sometimes black manages to hold it without any difficulty, and you just think, oh, this must just be equal. And then sometimes black gets horribly ground, and you think, oh, good lord, that's just terrible. I just think it's quite a difficult position to play for black. You really need to know what you're doing. And I really found that in my engine games, Leela played this very, very nicely. I mean, in essence, black's got a little bit more space, I suppose you'd say, a little bit more development on the queen side. So Leela's really trying to get its queen side pawns moving, b4, a5, a4, bishop a6, and for white's got the big advantage on the king side, so white's going to try and advance its king side pawns and gain space in that way. Let's have a look how things turned out. As you'll see in the game, Stockfish played somewhat more passively and never really got any counterplay going, and well, that's kind of fatal against AlphaZero. So black played b4. That's a good start. Just stopping the pawn from coming to c3, and when you play the pawn to b4, it means that the pawn on a5 can move as well. Now AlphaZero played king d2. In my engine games, a couple of interesting games here. Always Stockfish white against Leela black. So h4 was played by Stockfish, f6, hitting the pawn on e5, and we're trying to make use of that rook on the f file. Rook hf1 from Stockfish, a5 now, bishop a6, rook e1, and a4. Really very active play here from Leela. I mean, with this a4 and b4, you've got two ideas. You can play a3 and try and get a square on c3 for the knight, because if you get a knight on c3 attacking a pawn on a2, that's rather inconvenient for white. The other idea is also to play b3, because there's this pressure of the knight on c5 and bishop a6 on the bishop on d3, so b3 undermines the c2 pawn. Here white played f5, trying to sharpen things up. A3, b3, knight e4 check, going for that knight c3. Takes, bishop on a6 is now attacking the rook on f1. And after rook f2, takes, this was not too bad for black. It was, white's, as always, is just a tiny bit better, but there's counterplay with rook f2 check, these pawns on light squares, a2, b3, c2, a bit of a target for the bishop on f1. And Leela managed to hold this quite nicely, in actual fact. So that was quite a nice defense. There was also a game where Stockfish played g4. And, well, we see something similar here again. a5, bishop a6, f6 here, hitting the center here. Stockfish decides to take on f6, but we're already getting pressure against f4 here. And after bishop a6, knight a6, takes, rook f7, take, king f8, knight c7. Slightly more uncomfortable for black, but again, you're playing g6 to chase away that knight on f5, and then your rooks are going to be active. And again, Leela managed to hold this without too many difficulties. So, I mean, I definitely think that if black's going to do something, this, combined activity, a5, a4, f6, that's what you need to do. And we'll give Leela the starting position, and it defends, very well. And I think, just in these initial positions, with white, Leela was scoring 2, maybe 3 wins, but it was drawing, most of them with black as well. So it was actually scoring a plus score from here. which on my hardware
Do
is
you see any black wins in this kind of ending?
no,
Would
never.
it be more a white win or a draw?
It's a white win or a draw. I think in human games it's possible because you can miscalculate stuff. Especially with these queenside pawns coming down. But in engine games that doesn't really happen. No, it's really this is either a white win or a draw. In engine games.
Yeah.
So AlphaZero played King D2, which is nice, sensible move. And here Stockfish played Bishop D7, which is oh bless you, which is fine, but again it's not half as active as A5 and Bishop A6. So AlphaZero continued with King E3, all very typical and classical. So an old game of Tarashes against. Was it Teichmann? I think I can't remember the, but where something very similar happens. King comes to E3. Black doesn't play B4 in that game, so he never really gets any queenside play going, and White just advances the kingside pawns. And this is exactly what AlphaZero is going to do. F6, H4, and now Stockfish played H6. Leela, I think, was playing this move, Bishop B5, which is unusual and interesting. Really trying to make use of that Bishop on D7 to play Bishop B5. I mean, it's not quite as good as A5 and Bishop A6, but it's a similar sort of idea. Of course, the idea always is that, if you manage to exchange off the light squared bishops, then Black gets a square on E4 for the knight. That's another good idea. The point about this one always is that if takes, then the rook on A8 is attacking the pawn on A2. That's one of the justifications. How did it continue? I think White played G4, Rook F7, Rook F1. Then Black played Rook F8, which is quite interesting, threatening to open up the F file maybe. So E takes F6, G F6, and here White had the opportunity, which it took, to win a pawn, which looks quite decent. But Black's got this typical response, which is to go in there and knight A4. It's rather annoying for White. I mean, if you play B3, then knight C3 is going to win a pawn back. You can't hold that A2 pawn forever. And if you play something like Rook B1, then that's very, very passive. Something like very passive. And this pawn on B4, knight and A4 really hold back these three white pawns. So, Stockfish played F5, just trying to break things up. But somehow here in this sort of little tactical melee, then White somehow, Black somehow managed to survive this. It's quite, it's much more fraught, this one. All the pawns are weak, but somehow Black's activity pulled through. White played A3, knight C5, going to get a knight onto E4, Bishop F3, knight E4, and just about held it like that. But I wouldn't like to bet on it if I was playing it with Black, certainly. But still, Leela playing these very active ideas. Stockfish played again a lot more passively. H6, G4, and then King F7. So evacuating the king from the kingside, and just going to put it on E7, just trying to hold the position basically. Rook DG1. And essentially now Black's time for active counterplay has really passed. So now it's a question of hanging in there attritionally and trying to hold the position. And funnily enough, now in my engine games, the whole balance switches because as Black, Stockfish was doing a much better job of scoring draws than Leela. Leela was losing a lot of games from this type of position, whereas Stockfish was holding it much better. And of course, that's this attritional defence. That's what Stockfish does really, really well, and Leela much less well. So quite interesting to see.
White's going. It looks like White's going for G5 here.
Indeed.
As opposed to something like H5 and trying to kind of hold it in place where it is. Yeah,
no, that's right. I mean, White's really trying to open up a file on the king side first of all. And it really does so. This move knight f3 is very important. You're going to see it's another one of those great AlphaZero knight maneuvers that's coming in. not at all obvious, why this sort of move is good, but well, we'll see it later. So king e7 from black, and now g5. So threatening g takes f6 and rook g7. So Stockfish takes the decision just to close the kingside with f5 here. So white has achieved some opening on the kingside, the h file. But it's a very, very narrow path, really, and well, you don't really think that you'll be able to win this just on the kingside. But first of all, AlphaZero's got this great idea for optimizing its pieces: g6, creating an outpost on h7 for a rook, and funnily enough, also creating an outpost on f7 for the knight. And well, when you go to f7, you're going to chase the rook away from h8, so you'll get into h7. And of course, that knight is also looking to come into d6 as well. So rook g8, knight f7, a5 from black, just well, getting the pawn probably out of the attack of the bishop on d3 and supporting the pawn on b4. A good move always to play. Rook h7, and this is a slightly annoying move. White's actually threatening knight h6 here, chasing the rook away from g8. So the king has to defend the pawn. But that means now that a rook on g8 is now rather cut off from the queenside. And obviously the king is also tied down to the back rank. So now AlphaZero, very thematically, starts very looking to open up the queenside. Because obviously with the king and rook badly placed, it's going to be quite dangerous well, going to be quite difficult to deal with a queenside invasion. So king d4, knight e4, took rook h2, defending the pawn on c2. The rook can always return to h7 if ever the rook on g8 wants to move from g8. Also very difficult for black to get the rooks active. This knight on d6 is an absolute monster. So what
king's active as well compared with black.
Exactly, yeah.
And knight compared with the bishop, so all of white's pieces look more active.
Exactly, all of white's pieces have really got very active there. So Stockfish plays a slightly strange idea here, rook b6. I think the idea is to connect the rooks because white's got another idea of playing rook h1 and then rook h8, and invading like that. So rook a1, rook b8, b3. And white's idea simply is to play a3 and open the a file. Going to be very hard for black to deal with that. Black plays bishop e8, attacking the pawn on g6. Probably thinking that either white's going to play rook g1 or rook g2, but in both cases moving off an open file. But nothing could be further from AlphaZero's thoughts. This move a3 is very strong. Bishop takes g6, ab, ab, and rook a7. And what you're going to notice is that, well, now the black king on f8 is restricted in a different way. Before, the pawn on g6 was taking control of f7. Now it's the rook on a7, combined with the knight on d6. And the point of this is that after rook h7, bishop g6, well, we can just go rook d7, because bishop h7 allows rook f7 checkmate. So black, despite getting that pawn on g6, is still completely tied up. And well, you'll notice that this move a3 takes b4. It's, well, caused a big weakness on b4. So I mean, it's going to be very hard for black to actually defend this pawn on b4. And of course, once this pawn goes, white's got two connected passed pawns. So I think the writing's on the wall for black there. I mean, can't move the bishop on e8, can't move the rook on g8, can't move the king on f8, can't move the pawn on g5 because the rook f7 check would be checkmate. So, yeah, black's really, black wasn't very active, from the opening, and has been really made to pay for that. So rook b6, rook c8 from AlphaZero, and then king c5. You could win this position in many different ways. AlphaZero's way is absolutely good enough. Rook c8 took away the square b8 from the rook, so actually rook a6 is necessary here, and of course now the pawn on b4 is hanging. You could try and take it, but AlphaZero plays rook h2, The idea now, as you'll see, is that after king d7, rook b8, we're coming around to d2. And if black doesn't do anything, hard to find a move that doesn't actually do very much. Well, for example, rook a1, we could play a move like rook b7 check, king f8 and knight e8, amongst many others. Rook b8 check and rook d7 check is going to pick up the rook on g8.
The rook. Yeah.
Indeed, something like this. So, yeah, I mean, very many ways now for white to win this position. Black played e3, obviously trying to distract the white rook from the d file, and that works temporarily. AlphaZero puts its rook back to h2. Rook f8, rook b7 check, and king d4. And well, white's just going to pick up that pawn on e3, and then well, come round again, probably play the rook to d2. Attack the pawn d7, maybe even just play the king back to c5 and take the pawn on b4. Take the pawn on b4 with a rook, you know. I mean, it's all happening really for white. So Stockfish played rook takes d6, just one of those desperation exchange sacrifices to make the game last longer. But now 2 pawns go as well, so white's just a clear exchange up with 2 connected queenside pawns. The game continues for a little while. AlphaZero moves its king over to the queen side, pins this rook, pins this bishop rather, and also puts a little break on the king side pawns here. Rooks on c5 and d4, stopping the pawns from advancing, and also threatening rook dc4, you know, taking the bishop on c6. Yeah, I've got to say, AlphaZero is a really very strong endgame player. It's one of the things, actually, when Leela first started out, its endgames were rather dodgy, but AlphaZero's endgames have always been exceptional. To be honest, I don't think you beat Stockfish unless you've got, you know, very good technique, because it can resist in these positions forever and ever. King b6, rook e4.
Leela's endgames have improved, haven't they? They're no longer dodgy.
Yeah, Leela's endgames are much better now. So that was one of the big things that improved, you know, and it's so important.
They used to quite strange evaluations, and Leela was quite optimistic about endgames all the time, it seemed.
Yeah, and you know, just I think was losing some endgames, you know, because Stockfish is a very strong endgame player as well. But now it's just a lot better, and yeah, I mean that's why Leela is challenging Stockfish so heavily. So bishop d7, king d2. King's moving out of the way now to allow the pawns b4 and c4 to advance. Also keeping the king, you know, within range of the kingside pawns, just not let them get too far away. Stockfish does some little checks. AlphaZero range 0 starts moving its pawns forward. King b5, try and stop the c pawn from moving. But after rook e5, the evaluation was so low now for black that Stockfish resigned. King a4 allows the very nice rook a5 checkmate. And if you go king b6, then c4 is going to be the beginning of the end. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that game. It was I liked it very much, actually. I thought it was a very nice, smooth win, and especially actually all the work that I did with my engine games. So looking at how Leela would play this with black, you know, and I think I get a very good idea of you know, probably the actual evaluation of this position, probably just slightly better for white, and you know, how black can best try to hold it with this very active queenside play. And also very interesting to see, you know, just with a slightly more passive play from Stockfish, not doing anything terribly wrong, but really just waiting for white to come on at it. I thought it was very instructive how AlphaZero managed to do this. You know, it's really, you know, the classical way of doing it: tie the opponent down on one wing, and then afterwards open up the other wing. You know, really. Principle of two weaknesses, you know, really classical stuff there, you know. And
it's quite nice, isn't it, how some of the same themes that we've been looking at in the middle game are also applying in this endgame. So there's like
exactly
putting this pawn onto g6 and tying down the king and getting the greater mobility.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. I mean, it's AlphaZero is playing pretty much the same, whether it's a middle game or an ending. You know, it's all about the piece mobility, restricting the opponent's pieces, the king especially, putting the king in danger. I mean, we saw how many mating motifs there were. You know, that was how the black king was restricted. And yeah, and switching between wings again, very very typical AlphaZero to play over the whole board, and ended it beautifully here. So and yeah, again, for me, quite striking that this win does look a lot like some of the games that that Leela's been beating Stockfish with. So obviously pretty difficult to sort out the evaluation and the play in these positions, even if Stockfish has got a lot better at it. And of course, that's going to be very interesting, just to see whether Stockfish NNUE, whether having that NN evaluation actually removes this weakness, from Stockfish. Because, yeah, if it hasn't got this weakness, then, well, and it's still got most of its other strength, then, yeah, could be pretty awesome.
It'd be interesting to see if they're see the French defence games, won't it? In this
exactly, yeah, really looking forward to seeing that, to see how the French defence goes for Stockfish NNUE. So there we are. I mean, if you enjoyed that and you haven't subscribed yet, then
please subscribe.
Yes, if you're a keen shogi player, actually, then take a look on the 30th of August. There is a shogi tournament that we're organising as part of the Mind Sports Olympiad, which should be great fun. So if you're keen on shogi, we know we've got a few shogi players on our channel. Then please do take a look at that.
Please do enter, please play, and actually there's still time to learn shogi before then. If you've been tempted to try it out, then we've got another couple of videos on this channel about how to play shogi if you are a chess player. So try it out. And also, if you want to watch some shogi, there's some shogi on today. The European Blitz Championships being held on 81 Dojo.
Exactly. And reason I mentioned shogi, apart from a little plug for our tournament, is that actually this Stockfish NNUE, the way the neural netifying of Stockfish, that actually comes from shogi, from shogi programmers who'd implemented this in their shogi programs already. So there's definitely some links between all the games there. Well, there we are. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and well, keep on watching this channel. There's lots more to come.
Thank you for watching.